Right, Miho, sir, nice to see you. Tyler here. Office hours 49, coming up on 50. Be honest, we took a couple of weeks off throughout the year. We should be over 50, but I still feel proud of the effort and consistency. I missed last week's, but excited to be back. A little bit of a smaller team here today. That's always just on pushing lots of changes. So lots of good stuff on the way here, and very excited to share that. Maybe a little bit today, but more in the upcoming weeks. What's going on right now? Very sort of shared with the team this week, just like getting deeper and deeper. We've made a significant update to the dashboard and sort of exploring insights. And I feel like we're like digging a hole and we're like almost to the bottom where there's like gold or treasure in there. I feel like we keep getting closer and closer. It's like I can now see the wooden box that the treasure's inside, and I'm like trying to dig it and get it out all the way. And that's like how I'm looking at these insights that we pull from language. And I think a couple very exciting projects where we're helping some of our customers and partners, clients, whatever we want to call them, love them all, reveal that information. So that's very exciting to me. So I'm done. I guess any opening thoughts from you?
No, I think that the kind of work we've been doing is great. Really moving towards this holistic thinking of, now that we've made it simple and seamless for you to get your media in, store your media, like sort through it, sort through all that language data. Now our next step of figuring out is how do we give you very useful insights right off the bat. And the second part is how do you actually deliver value through that data that we give you? So, the second piece there is just making it easier for you to share your media, share your insights with other stakeholders, like research partners, whatever it is you might be doing. So pretty exciting to think about how we can better tell stories with the data that we're helping people produce. And just excited to keep developing some new solutions and features in that direction.
It's interesting because we are both marketers. We're used to dealing with data, and really in the end it comes down to, I don't know what your exact sort of deliverable relationship or how you dealt with customers in your previous work, but like in the end it really did come down to like a monthly summary report where often you jump on a call and give a couple of takeaways. And in a way you look at this data that we're dealing with, this language data, which I think is absolutely valuable, and we're applying those same practices. It's a little harder sometimes to get it because of the structure of the information and how complex language is.
I also think that the more I think about it too, and even just other players in the space and what some of them do as well, right? Like I still find, for example, the way maybe as an industry where we're maybe falling behind or failing, or maybe just the tech isn't quite there yet, is our insights. For example, when we talk about action items, right? It's very rudimentary. It's very much like, is this an action item? Or like, is this actually something that someone that, like, let's say it's a research deliverable. Is this something that your end user could take and actually use towards building something that impacts their revenue or their output, whatever that might be? So I think that, because even just this question about, talking to clients and figuring out what deliverables they care about, a lot of the times they couldn't care less about like all the nuances of the data and like, I don't care about my page visits that much. I don't care about how many people are seeing my pages. I care about, okay, people are seeing these pages, they're converting at X percentage. What are my next steps to actually have an impact on growing this or moving this forward or improving it, right? And I think that's the direction we're trying to move in as well. It's like, it's not just here's the data and you're on your own. It's here's the data, here's this kind of playground for you as the more technical person to play around with and extract the insights that matter to maybe your understanding. But then the next level of that is how do you take that information and then make it accessible for your desired end user, right? In a way that actually is A, simple, and B, actually useful in their kind of work or in whatever end goal they're trying to achieve. So, yeah.
It's interesting because, even if we use that example of action items that you're talking about, it's like sometime every time someone says need to, then from a conversation, you're trying to help them to, show action items, but, someone said there was 25 iterations of that. So that's still 25 sentences that you have. There's still, even when you use filters to filter down, there's just so much information, and that's what we need to sort of see through. And obviously, as you've touched on, different goals and different spaces for different people, whether it's revenue, whatever it is. But at the core, they're all looking to, I'm going to be a nerd. I love the data, but that's not what everyone wants to be. And we're continuing to see that part. And I got stuck up. I got hung up on this. I just said it when we were having that conversation in marketing this week, where it's like this import insights thing. It was like when I was like, oh, wow. So probably more profound to me than anyone else, but it's also like what we've sort of talked about, which is there's all these data sources available, so much of that containing language information. Right now, current status is that, unless you have a very technically savvy team, generally that's hard information to process, to understand, comprehend, derive insights from. And one of the core concepts that we sort of talked about within that is this idea of like first party versus third party data. And that's another one that sort of sticks out to me, which is, in some cases, one of the things that we're processing most are sort of market research interviews. Some of those are for research firms, some of them more for marketing agency or just companies doing competitive intelligence. That's a first party source of data. That then there is a need to understand this entire pipeline. Like where does this happen? How do you capture it? How do you bring it into speak? How do you improve the accuracy? And then how do you generate insights from it? So this idea from import to insight, it's not like a series, but what I hope we can start to look at that is like all those different paths of possible language data that are valuable in the industries and segments that we want. How can we give people the step-by-step guide to getting to those insights?
I guess, do we want to just hop into point number one? I mean, I guess we've started right off the bat.
Yeah, we jumped right in. I want to show that this was just interesting. I'll share this. Someone just reached out to me today, and I think it's because we started to talk a little bit, talked a little bit more online about like sources of third-party data and how could we visualize that. So this was a person who, am I sharing the right screen? You can see this.
Research, is it research?
Yeah.
Like regulations.
So someone I know following along, sort of aware of what we're doing. I think even a speak user, they're trying to track, so basically sentiment and basically do an analysis on these comments as they come up. So this just opened on January 14th, and there's a comment period for 24 days. And now people, something about controlled substances and the government looking at, changing the regulations on it. So what happens is people are able to then leave a comment, and all these just sort of combine into what, like, even for us right now, like for me to go and click on every single one of these is sort of a hassle. Ideally, like this one's still pretty niche in the amount of comments, but we've seen ones that are thousands and thousands of comments. So how could you, as a third-party source of data, one that's just valuable, and literally someone sent me this message right before I hopped on this call, automatically grab that information, pull it into speak, derive insights, make it more meaningful, make it more navigatable. So that just this idea of first party versus third party data, where is this meaningful information? And I think one thing we've talked about a couple of times is just also the shift to, we're moving to a very private, very privacy centric, privacy first, privacy focused world. A lot of it, started with, rightfully, where people taking back their rights of privacy and data and ownership. A lot of that, set a precedent by GDPR, and how specifically like EU views this in a much more human, holistic way, I find, than maybe some of our reckless North American folks here. But as we make this shift and cookies start to fade out, and as we talked about this week, like understanding like open rates on emails and things change, your ability to gather valuable information from your own customers, your own people, becomes very important. And also maybe looking into more third-party data sources that are valuable sources of information. So that's all. I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, I think that's exciting. Like I like this idea of importance put into both first party and third party data, because obviously if you are a larger team, or maybe you do have funding, like you're more likely to have access to first party data versus more often than not, if you don't quite have that opportunity, you have to rely on third-party information or open source information, whatever it is, to actually achieve your kind of insight goals. So I think there's definitely value in this integration with third-party sources, because like part of our goal is also to become this all-in-one kind of central location where you can securely store your information, information that you've pulled in, maybe proprietary information that you've been given access to, stored securely in one place, and then reduce the need for third-party applications and worrying about I need to learn how to do XYZ in order to achieve like A, when instead we just want you to be able to just bring everything here, analyze it, and then you get your outcome, right? And it's not to say that there's other specialized products that don't serve a purpose, but I think it's like anytime you niche down a product or like to a very technical level, you create this barrier to entry that might not be possible for some people to cross for various reasons, whether that's financially or just even from a skill perspective. The amount of time they need to put in to actually learn a very dedicated platform might not be a justifiable use of their time. So how do we live in that space where we can play with both, the more technical and advanced crowd, but also still, bring down that barrier to entry where your kind of average end user can still derive value from these large data sets. So I think that's an exciting direction that we're trying to take.
I sometimes get lost into technical things because I like to solve it. And that's, I'm happy with that I have that within me, but I don't know how many hours on a weekend I spent playing around with Python, scraping data sets, right? And
yeah, I was gonna say, we saw our toggle data, and you're like a double the rest of us. So it's like,
yeah, I love it. I love the stuff. So I can't, I can't really complain, but, and it's like those things, like, again, but should I probably get lost into Python scraping for 8 hours on a Saturday? Maybe not. And ideally, there's smarter people than me out in the world who they value their time. And instead of like, oh, I'm going to code this line by line, I can actually, for example, go into Speak, one click, and pull in the source of information that I want. And frankly, although I had a lot of fun and fulfillment out of that, I'm sure I could do cool things with that 8 hours. And so that's what we hope.
Yeah, you have a dog now. Need to take.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
So trying to think, anything else to add to that, but
I think just building off that, right? The second point we kind of have here is just this idea of natural language understanding for this almost Google or search focused experience for the data that people are bringing in. So I'm not sure if you had some starting thoughts there to kind of kickstart that conversation.
I guess it actually comes from, so one thing that just emerged for me, which I had thought of before, is like, because earlier we were talking about this and some opportunities. So the idea is like right now in Speak, there's a search function. In that search function, you type in a keyword or phrase, finds every instance of that. But what you're not necessarily doing is saying, more human-like search. Our whole team is full of robots, so we're, it's like a human-like search of, what is the most positive brand mentioned this week, and that should automatically give you the answer. We are already, you, I, 𝗏𝗏𝗁, our team is capable of getting that response through the filters, but ideally we shouldn't have to make someone do that. The part that I just thought that I think is interesting is we were talking about searching directly into the media library, but if we set up the questions that someone asks, they could part of the processing could actually be our scraping to bring in. So like the idea there, like just as Twitter as an example, is like, give me a report on this sentiment, the sentiment of this topic on Twitter this week, right? So in the back end, even if that's not in the library yet, that could actually create a a function or a call to then pull that data in that moment, run it, and then create the analysis. So just that's my new thought, is that right now we're sourcing specifically media that's in, which makes sense because you're referring to media that's already in your library. But if we actually bring in some of these capabilities, there might be a way to, no, there is a way to actually scrape, say, third-party data sources and get the answer. Does that make sense? Like, yeah. But ideally, sorry, I'll go back to where we were. Right now, what we're looking at is you have a bunch of media or text notes or survey responses or customer testimonials, research groups, whatever, and you're trying to query that data to find insights. And that was something that multiple research firms have talked to us about, is two functions. Either they are asked by their client to produce insight, or the other part is, so that's one big task. And like basically the more efficient that could be and the easier it is for us to enable that for research teams, the faster they can create that response, the more value is created for their client, the less time is taken up for them, and it's a win-win for everyone involved. But the other part here is what we're starting to see, and maybe talk about this a little bit, is like we're allowing our companies to share their libraries of media with their end clients as a deliverable. So now we could empower their end clients to make a human-like natural search, and they can get that information without intervention and having to take human labor from the research firm, and it creates an ongoing like value chain.
Because I think feeding just through this conversation, something that I guess kind of clicked in my head is, as a business, as a growing business, obviously our KPIs matter, but it also means the more we can tie into our kind of end users' KPIs and provide value to their KPIs and desired outcomes, not only do we become more useful, but I'd say we're achieving a sort of higher purpose with the product we've built as well, where it's beyond it's beyond just something we benefit from. It also becomes something that anyone that decides to use the platform can benefit from to achieve whatever goals that they're trying to achieve, right? So I think just building off this, I think we also read something about like search and analytics, right? Two powerful buzzwords, or just two powerful like fields, right? So it's this whole idea of, yeah, cool, because that's essentially what a lot of popular search engines are. Maybe not so much the analytics side on the front end, but creating this seamless search experience where, you know, Google, for example, has been able to monopolize like what is like 93% of the search market or whatever, right? And how can you kind of, once again, feeding off this topic of privacy and keeping your own data as owned data, how do you create this kind of safe system and safe community of information for your desired target audience, and make sure that that information stays relevant for the people that it's that need it or want that information? And you know, it's not to build more walled gardens, like, or at least ideally that's not how it's built, but it is more about it is more about building these almost like personal search engines for your organization, or even just for your personal use. If you are, let's say, a solo researcher or solo marketer, or just even someone that's just interested in getting insights on a topic. So I think really building off of that, building towards that kind of Google-like search where you can ask the system questions in a way, right? Like you provide a query, and based on that query, it'll actually surface relevant information from everything you've put in. So it's exciting to kind of see us building towards that. And when we get there, I think it's going to be like, it's going to be mind blowing.
Yeah, and it's sort of what you touched on. We've heard the term in the past, but I think it becomes more even relevant with some of the things we've been doing recently, is like this like institutional loss. Like when, you know, again, maybe an employee leaves a company and they have all this brain power, like that's now gone from the company and what remnants of that are left. And if they've been doing interviews or they've been, like that becomes part of this engine that you can now query and learn from. And so I think that part is, I'm personally really excited about that. And what else am I thinking here? I like that you said something clicks. It's always nice when something clicks, like, from like this like marketing perspective and idea. And I think the other piece that you touched on there is just like aligning with your customers' goals, right? Like we are generally seeing value created for, again, like marketing agency or research firm who are doing interviews or have at least a big set of data that they're trying to analyze. So how can, one of the challenges that, I've talked about this before, is like they're facing is that a research firm often will only maybe engage once or twice a year for a specific, discovery or exploration of maybe an obstacle facing a business or a challenge facing the business. But if we now help the firms create this deliverable that becomes this living, breathing engine of knowledge, what I believe we can see happening is these research firms are actually generating another revenue stream. So we're actually helping our companies create another revenue stream, building like a sticky relationship with the clients that they're serving, and yeah, just enabling both productivity and efficiency gains. And one of the best quotes we got last year was someone saying saves about 40% of their time, which is fantastic. And then also revenue gains, and then from the client, they're having end benefits. So I like this idea of value creation throughout the entire pipeline. And ideally, what's happening there, if we execute on this all properly, is a win-win-win situation. I would say even win-win-win-win-win, because if the company has better insights, they're going to make better decisions for their customers in the end. And that's a lot of people in that pipeline. Anything to add there before we maybe jump to a couple pieces? Cool. I guess just now, I don't want to be redundant because you and I were part of this initial conversation that we had, but however, anyone who watches or listens to this was not, which was as we were sort of building out content for the year, or I guess I would say the first quarter, we looked at, what are those most valuable things we could do? And some of that was how again, can you take maybe an interview all the way down to insights, and sort of doing that with different stacks of data sources. And what we sort of uncovered, or what you sort of asked at the end of that discussion, was like, what don't we have? And that then sort of accelerated this conversation about, okay, if we can just cross the chasm on these few things, all of a sudden everything that we've done becomes much more valuable. So I just wanted to touch on that a little bit, and some of the limitations, I guess, not just that Speak the system has, but what we're seeing, I think, in voice AI, speech recognition as a whole. And to quickly touch on that is, I saw a quote towards the end of last year. I forget exactly who said it, but they said, keyword spotting is no longer enough. A keyword is not enough. And so what we're trying to figure out, we know that because, again, we've had that experience of dealing with this data. It's like, what are these next layers of value? And just a quick example is, there's a data set that's in our system right now. A bunch of people are talking about a technology platform that they're using. That's fantastic. Great. We see that this keeps popping up in all the conversations. It's one of the most popular and important topics in that. That's only a high level of information. That's not drilling you down into, okay, so this is the brand or the technology product that we're talking about. This is market research that's being done. Now, what is this conversation specifically around this topic? And we don't necessarily do maybe a good enough job of that in the system right now. You could say, okay, I'm going to click on this product and it's going to reveal every sentence related to this product, but it doesn't necessarily summarize that for you. So what we're trying to do, it's not that far away, is like, out of 100 conversations, this product was mentioned 20 times. And out of that 20 times, out of those 100 conversations, here's the overall sentiment of it, and here's maybe top 5 examples, or top 5 most negative examples. That was a long string. I don't know, Nihal, any things to add to that?
I think, to your point, and this maybe ties a bit into this whole idea of creating a narrative with your data. It's like you said, keywords by themselves aren't necessarily enough. They give you some useful information, but what happens when you're not looking for, let's say credit card, I think is the example you used yesterday, but you're actually looking for credit card rates, right? So now that's technically not a keyword anymore. It's like a key phrase, right? And so it's like, now that you're able to identify this key phrase, that unlocks even more value, because now it's not, okay, I just search for words with credit, right? Or credit card, and then you have 300 entries to look through. Now it's like, okay, credit card rates out of those 300 entries were only really mentioned 5 times, right? And that is like super powerful and super insightful, because now you've cut out basically filtering manually through 300 entries to find that specific mention. And obviously with, if it's pure automated transcription, you might have missed data here and there, but if that much accuracy is your concern, you'll probably go the professional transcript route anyways. But for very, for efficiency and speed from import to insight, as you said, I think that it would be very powerful. And it also lets us build more meaningful end insights. So once we actually are able to build in a bit of this insights engine, where the information you put in can actually, you can start asking questions, or we'll kind of just pre-populate commonly asked queries. It'll really enable us to let people basically dump media, dump files, dump text notes, whatever it is. And every time you come into the platform, every time you add more information, this insights panel of yours will tell you in plain English. It won't be a bunch of numbers. It won't be a bunch of graphs. It'll literally just be, hey, like, I'm Bob, your research assistant, right? Like, essentially. And it's like, here are the top 5 insights that you chose, let's assume, right, for the day. And here's how, maybe, like, I believe 𝗵𝗏 mentioned something about comparisons. And so the next level of that is, okay, cool. Now here's this one-time snippet, this one-time snapshot, and here's how this snapshot compares to your data over time. And which is going to be cool, because now it's not only about, okay, I just uploaded things now. What does that look like? It's, let's say I recorded an interview, as an example, 6 months ago, and then I went back and interviewed the same person or the same group of individuals again 6 months later. Is there any difference in how they discussed this topic, right? Now, let's say, the Bank of Canada is talking about increasing interest rates. Now, is that something that's come up in conversations a lot more, where it's now people are worried about rates rising, people are more worried about inflation, and you kind of see that information populating the responses, which, and once again, you can get that data manually, but the whole point would be, now you don't have to. Like, you as a technical person can still do that digging and get more granular insight into what's going on. But talking about just having this democratization of the data you're populating, and letting your, let's say, your stakeholder, your kind of final deliverable partner, just access top level insights that they only care about for their C-suite presentations or their kind of team meetings, right? Like, you're basically cutting down their what's the term? It's like a something load, like a
Cognitive? No.
Yeah, kind of like the cognitive load they need to kind of put on themselves to achieve this end result, right? So let's say before, you were sending them these kind of slightly more in-depth reports where they'd actually need to, set aside an hour a day to read through these and come to their own conclusions, or build off your conclusions. Instead, now you're bringing that down to, let's say, 15 minutes. And, within 30 minutes, they've been able to read through your report, understand the top level things that they should be concerned about. And then they've built like their final report in 1 hour versus 3 hours. And now not only have you gained a bunch of value from the system, because, it sped up your research process, but you've actually passed on that time savings and that efficiency to the next person or the next team on the chain, which is like a really incredible thing.
Yeah, we've had the shortcoming experience in the past, which is, like I shared, at that point I was using Data Studio because we didn't even have and it was with some investors actually. And, this is too much work. You know what I mean? Was basically the response. It's like, I still have to filter through all this information myself. And so it's interesting because, you want to produce that sort of end report. And maybe an investor, executives, like you said, C-suite, like even if it's 80% accurate, but they only need to spend 15 minutes on it versus, an hour and a half, that's good enough. And then the other part that you touched on, which is something I've been thinking about, but I have no idea how to come at, which is like this like research assistant, like sort of like your AI powered research assistant. And maybe as we continue to evolve how we generate insights or as the sentences, like, I don't know if that makes sense, but like you said, Bob, obviously it's not Bob, but remember what's the thing that everyone hated in Microsoft Word, 𝗕cie or whatever, the clip.
People hate 𝗕cie. 𝗕cie was great.
I thought people, well, they tried to make a resurgence apparently. I thought everyone hated. Anyways, I didn't hate him, but like, is there this not sentient being, but is there a part of speak that actually is your sort of assistant that's then giving you these insights in a more digestible human-like way? And that becomes like the lower brain humanistic side of speak beyond like the data sort of scraping kind of thing. And just two other things that really I think you're interesting is like companies want to build everyone wants to be part of the AI revolution, and yet some of the most value is just coming from basically like simple mathematics, like you said, the comparison part. Like once the actual, for example, NLP or the insights are produced, when you're doing a filter, say last week compared to this week, that's just math at that point. And it's still actually, the AI was all the stuff to get it there, but in the end, it's just a simple comparison calculation that's creating value. And the other part that you talked about is sort of this credit card or like sentence piece. And at that case, you're really just getting down to word counting. You might not even be using you're not even using, in that case, like NLP or anything. It's just like a mathematical equation. But I think we, in a way, I'm talking we of our company, but then maybe even us as a part of these sort of AI spaces, like you don't need to have fancy AI baked in everything if it's creating value. So I think it's mind-blowing if you have, say, 50 interviews, or for example, if I'm looking at this more personally, and this maybe resonates with people, like I have all my Evernote notes that I ever wrote in here. And if I query back, and instead of just looking for keywords, I find, like I have an example here where it's like a 6-word phrase, where there's even like 8-word phrases. And I see that that's repeated over and over again. I'm like, wow, like the coincidence that many different people, or even myself at many different times, strung together those exact configuration of words is pretty significant. And so let's dig down deeper into that. And so just as that, to complete that example from this research engagement, to say there's 100 interviews and 5 people said an 8-word phrase or a 5-word, like, holy crap, that's pretty wild. That's something that is an insight compared to just maybe a keyword that gets spotted there. So yeah, that's I guess just trying to get over that hoop of, we don't care to continue using AI. We've already got enough AI baked into our product. Now it becomes insights and value creation. And sometimes you just use the simplest route to get there. Good. Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
We're beating a horse to death here. I shouldn't say that's a horrible. That's a bad.
That is a bad.
But yeah. I grew up on a horse farm, but so I love horses. So that's as I said it. But the idea there is like, anyone who's tuned into our conversations know how deep and technical we can get about extracting insights from language. But I hope that's why, if anyone likes this, they also love it, because they're as consumed by this as we are. Couple other quick things we can, keep this a little shorter here today, but I think is a point that you touched on almost with this research assistant, is this idea of this like narrative insights. And we've touched this a little bit. It's like the sentence structure or outcome that you're looking for. And so one of the most impressive things I didn't even realize existed I knew Tableau existed, but just the fact that it would take any chart or any sort of data and just like basically like one click narrative form, and it would just generate the sentence. And I hope we can get to a part where we speak where it's like, Google like search, narrative result with a beautiful chart that correlates with that. And that becomes the sort of shareable report. And that's generated as quickly as possible with as high as accuracy. So that's one other thing. Anything on there? No. Cool. One last part that I'm, maybe one part that I'm also interested in that you touched on, which is just this idea of real-time updating, or like the sync, like a sync being created. So talked about their research firms creating this sort of library as a deliverable for their clients. And ideally what happens is, we're generating this shareable media library, which sounds abstract right now because we haven't shared much about it, but you can take a folder and Speak. Yes, folders are now into Speak. And I can organize a client engagement, say first batch of interviews, and I can organize that into one folder. And then, and then I can also add another client engagement with other research interviews in. And basically what is possible, or what's unlocking there, is what you said, 𝗕𝗏, which is like, I can now create that link for my client, and they can see the difference between the first round of interviews versus the second round of interviews. And every time you add a new media recording in or a new interview in, it's automatically updating. So that becomes a really cool live 365, 24/7 adjusting dashboard that's producing insights on an ongoing basis. And I'm also, as we touched about it, is like, we looked at that government regulation part, just that partway through this episode. And it's like, how can we as a company take that URL and sync into that page, and then every time a new comment's populated, it just automatically pulls into the dashboard. And the most easy example of this, that's just one that's actually started to play a little bit of a role for us here, was this idea of like an RSS feed. So RSS feed is a very popular way to disseminate information. Most people may be familiar with it from a podcast production piece. So that, what I like about this, and I mean, I've got silly examples of it right now, but I hooked in the Always Sunny in Philadelphia podcast. And every single time a podcast is published, it gets pulled in automatically, and I get a little email summarizing the episode. And very niche, like you said, 𝗕𝗏, maybe people on our team sometimes do things out of interest, but it's fun. I like it. And it's produced a pipeline where I think we can create value. And from a more validated standpoint, from a commercial thing, is like this idea of podcasts, especially in different industry segments, or depending on the specific podcast or even episode, there could be a wealth of information that's knowledgeable, that's relevant for your market, or competitive insights or intelligence. So by creating that live sync into Speak, you're continually creating value automatically. So that's another thing I'm really excited about with this sort of library and some of this third-party data sources that we're pulling in.
For sure.
Okay, I know we're coming at the end of this one. I can feel it. Feeling 𝗕𝗏. Any last things, I guess? We talked just a little bit of an experimentation this week around letting users of Speak personalize how they're using Speak, and then what that costs them. How we're building those packages. And I think one thing that also depends how you're growing your company and building your company. And one thing that I think I not fell victim to, but got it's like SaaS, SaaS everything, right? And like anything that deviates a little bit from that, / if someone isn't subscribing to your exact specific plan and configuration, that you don't even almost like want them as a customer, because that means they didn't see the value in the current plan laid out. And I think ideally, you can actually lay out plans that are so valuable because you've worked through it so well that it makes perfect sense. But especially with the complexity of our system, sometimes it's like, I want the text analysis, but I don't need any hours. But I'm paying for hours per month. So why am I overpaying for a part of a system that I'm not going to use? And so what we sort of are working through in very early iterations is letting people sort of personalize these plans on Speak. And sort of our first experimentation with that this week, really talking to people who have previously signed up for Speak, as 𝗕𝗏 put it, sort of early adopters, some of the visionary people who saw the value of Speak. And then as more and more people sign up, just giving them that chance of, okay, you test out the system, you like this or you need this, you don't need that. Let us know what you need, and we will help build that and make that happen for you. So I guess just maybe any thoughts from you, or even from a marketing perspective, yeah, just any thoughts around that.
Muted. always with mute. The mute's always your worst enemy. So I think that this, you kind of put it perfectly in the sense of sometimes falling to that SaaS trap of you need to be perfectly executing on every little system that you build. And it's like, if that system doesn't work for someone, like they're not necessarily a right fit. But I think sometimes we need to also use a bit of just general consumer solution. Sorry, I just got distracted by 𝗲𝗲𝗁's message. So like sometimes helping, if you think about it from just providing a consumer grade solution, sometimes it's how can we, because sure, like there's a business side of and the revenue side that we need to care about, but we also just care about helping people actually achieve their end goals. So it's like, if the kind of barrier to entry for someone is, oh, I feel like I am overpaying for a part of a system that I don't use, especially at this stage where we do have a bit more flexibility in how we approach some of our, I guess, customer solutions. Why not just give them the option to, sure, because our system has plenty of capabilities that don't rely on transcription, right? So it's, why would we, I guess, deny someone the opportunity to get those features without subscribing, I guess, to like transcription minutes that they might never use. And I think it's also given us a bit of clarity, because now, especially the state of the transcription industry, right, where there are companies that are just severely underpriced, or it's really commodified what people are willing to pay for pure transcription. So it's almost like, okay, but we aren't just pure transcription. We actually have this analysis side of our software, which I'd argue is the larger part of our software that can 100% be used even without this transcription element. But then it's like, if you still need the transcription, it's like, why complicate your workflow by, I understand from a budget perspective, but let's say, because we're quite competitive in how we price our transcription minutes, as well as our professional transcription services. So why not just keep everything under one roof? It makes things more secure. Not only are things more secure, you're also just simplifying your workflow, which is part of our ethos as well, where you don't need 10 different things to achieve, end up at the same spot. It's just use us, and we will help you and try to figure out a solution that works best for your budget and your needs. But at the same time, it's also, I think it's a two-way relationship, where obviously in most cases customers don't really care about us as much as we care about them, but we also need to care about us. So it's what makes sense to help someone, but also what's not going to sink us, right? And it's kind of finding that balance where we still want to be profitable as a business, but kind of a bit of flexibility in how we achieve that profitability while still having a bit of leeway for better serving our customers as well. So to your point about this whole plan personalization, it's kind of neat, because what we've kind of allowed people to do is build their own plans, essentially, right? Like imagine a Build-A-Bear workshop, but for a SaaS product. So it's how do we get people to feel comfortable enough with this concept? Because I think people, like, there's also this kind of mental barrier of, okay, there must be like a caveat. Oh, this is going to be a temporary price, or you're just going to pull the rug under me and like charge me a one-time fee. So I think there are like a lot of considerations from a consumer perspective that we're learning as we experiment, right? Like, why might someone be wary about this deal, for example, and how do we maybe address those concerns to let them know that literally you will only pay for what you need, in a way. Obviously there are parts of the system that we can't remove, because that is the baseline of what our system is built on, but there are elements of our system that are a bit more customizable, to kind of help you achieve your end goals.
And you touched on something that's important, which is like, especially with a system like ours, you're sort of making an investment into the system, an investment into us. So if we, set up plans to be unprofitable, it actually affects the sustainability of the business and the sustainability of the investment that you're making. So we are working with, our end users as partners to set up something that everyone is excited for. I don't know why this is sticking out to me. But like, it's like if you go to a ski hill and you're going skiing for the weekend, and you like, I'm thinking of skis or the snowboard as like, say, transcripts, and you already have skis or snowboards, and then the ski hill's like, no, you have to rent snowboards, or otherwise you can't use the hill, or it's going to be $500 even if you don't use the snowboard. People will be like, why the hell would I do this? I brought my own skiboard or snowboard, so like trying to also just think of it in that as, who am I as like, sometimes when you're building a business, you almost like, it's always important, like the main driver is empathy. And sometimes you take yourself out of, you're building a business and you're focused on growth and everything. You're also like, forget that you are also a consumer of many things. And if a company, for example, treated me this way, how would it make me feel? Or if I actually wanted to use something, but they, they tack this on and it becomes unaffordable, like I'm going to start searching around for other options. So just trying to build that into everything that we do, to put the people who are using Speak or investing in us in it, because in a way, you said it, like a lot of these people are sort of visionaries or early adopters, and reducing the risk for them as those people too I think is really important. So it's been fun to experiment, learned a lot this week, excited to continue to refine. And at the start of every experiment, it's funny because you have these like sort of grandiose ambitions or expectations, and you're always trying to move the needle for improvement. But what you forget to do, remember sometimes, is that like a small incremental improvement can make a big difference over time. And so that's also just like, I'm reminding myself this week of, okay, maybe it's not 100% perfect of the execution or that we figured out, but even if this pipeline helps us get a few more extra customers each week and we build great relationships with that, that's very exciting. So I have nothing else to say. Anything else from you, Nihal, before we wrap this up?
No, I think that was a good, solid conversation, and I think once again, it'll be interesting to see if this maybe it was a bit more even today with like just us two.
Yeah,
kind of forced to split the time.
I still feel like I probably won the speaker talk time battle, but you tried and you did good. But
Yeah.
some of the things are that we talked about today are actually some things that are pretty fresh that came from conversations that we had this week, and so it's still like, feel like, what am I doing? Like when I'm trying to articulate them, I'm like walking through a maze of like, how do I even describe this? So one other thing quickly is like, that's the other part that I'm just, I know you've worked on a lot. I've constantly working on and failing at, but it's like, I had this investor reach out, like, oh, this is really interesting. I think they signed up for the platform, sent me an email, maybe like 5 hours later, like, this is too complex. We can't look at this right now. And so that's the other thing is like, it takes me, a minute to figure out how to string together a sentence explaining why this is important and why this is valuable. But like generally a very small percentage of the population cares. What they care about is what we talked about a bit at the start of the episode, is like the insight at the end or the value to me as a person. And so that is something that I'm trying to work. I know, again, that you are like, who cares? The AI, the NLP, the sentiment analysis. What I care is, does this help me save time? Does it make me money? Does it, that's I think the 5 reasons why people buy products, does it actually supplement those? And then one of the questions that I asked you, sort of the group this week, is like, say I sign up for Speak. Great. But why, if I don't say start using Speak after the free trial, like, why does that matter? What why do I need to start using Speaker right now? Like, how is this going to change my year for the better? And I think in some ways we answer that, but in some ways we still have a big gap to do that. And even with this sort of new sort of personalized offer, I shared it with a couple of people who are sort of sales advisors and stuff, and they still drill down on questioning of how we can position that even better. So you don't have to answer me on this thing, but that's something that I think I'm thinking of. I know that you're thinking of, but I think every person who's building product or technology needs to think of. It's like, why now? Why do someone need to use this? And it's also, as I mentioned in that question, was like, this is also something investors ask if you're having a conversation, you're building a company. It's okay, why now? Is this the right time? Why you? And unless you can be very sharp, defined with that answer and it's compelling, you're going to have a very difficult time climbing up that hill. So just a food for thought that I'm thinking of as I go into the weekend, and hopefully I can come back with some maybe some compelling answers next week.
Yeah, for sure. This was a good chat.
Cool. Okay, 𝗍𝗲, great to see you, sir. Enjoy the weekend. Let me know if anything else pops up, but if I don't see you, thanks for everything this week. This was a good week.
Everyone.
Bye, everyone.